Now in section 2, we want to talk about how to begin the witnessing conversation. Some people say that's the most difficult part, is where do I begin? How do I transition a conversation from very common themes and very common subjects to something so deep and so personal? First of all, understand this. No conversation starts with the heavy issues of life. In fact, they start with lighter things. You don't go up to someone you just first met and say, "Hey, how's your marriage?" Or "How much money do you make?" No, you start with the lighter things and then move to the heavier things. And so when you share your faith, now remember, be very natural, look someone in the eye, be pleasant, show a smile, but be yourself. There's a story of a layman who had gone out 4 or 5 times and never even gotten through the door of someone that he was trying to witness to. And so he went to his preacher and he said, "Preacher, would you go out with me tonight and see what I'm doing wrong?" Well, the preacher said to him, "I know you're not doing anything wrong. Sometimes it's difficult. Just keep trying your best." And he said, "No, I'm doing something wrong." And so the preacher said, "Okay, I'll go out with you." And so they went out together, and while they're driving to the person's house that they're going to visit, they were laughing, having a good time, cutting up. And then when they pulled up to the house, they both got out and walked to the front door. Now, the door that they're going to knock on is the home of a friend of the witness. And so when they got to that door, the preacher said that the witness all of a sudden started stiffening up. He rang the doorbell, and when the friend of the witness comes in, he says, "Joe, I'm here to talk to you about the Lord." And right then the pastor said, I just grabbed my face and said, "Oh no, I see what's going on." Be yourself. Be natural. It's difficult, but try to relax. You see, the more you share, the more relaxed you will become. And so just try to be yourself. Use your personality, the one that God gave you, and God will use you in a mighty way. Now, sharing and starting out the conversation. A lot of times we start out with things like lighter subjects, as we talked about, but we've given you a guided conversation, an acrostic of the word CAST, C-A-S-T, to help as you go from one stage or one step to the next. You see, the C represents connection. It's important for the witness to make the connection with that lost person. The connection is something as general as maybe you're there sharing a park bench, or maybe you're sitting next to a person on a subway, or maybe on an airplane. But until you engage them, you really haven't made that connection. And so you can start it with a very light topic. For example, where are you from? Or how long have you lived there? Or where did you live before then? And you can talk about these subjects. It's critical for us not just to make the connection in a conversation, but also have a desire to make a connection with them personally. God had this desire. The Bible says that the Word became flesh and then dwelt among us. For what purpose? For relationships. Paul said it like this in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. He said that I've become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. Connection, relationships. And so C, find out a little bit about them. And now as you transition from C, you go to A and you begin to talk about activities. Activities is a critical part because it tells you a little bit about the things that they're passionate about, things that they really enjoy, things that they're devoting so much of their life and time to, kids and sports or whatever it may be. But it also gives you a chance to really strengthen that connection that you're making. Maybe you can share some of your experiences, and then you can also find out some things you have in common. Then as you go from that connection, and then you go to those activities and find out those things, then you can transition into the spiritual side of life. Now, this might seem awkward to you at first, but transition it in a way that's smooth. In other words, don't say, "Hey, if you were to die today, would you go to heaven or hell?" They would kind of look and say, "Where'd that come from?" But you might say this, "You know, you love hiking. When you get up on that mountain, do you ever look around and say, 'Wow, what a great place God has made'?" Do you think about spiritual things much? I mean, do you pray, or do you believe in God? Those kind of things. And then that will allow that person to express their views, their thoughts, their beliefs. And it also, now watch, it also allows you to understand where they are. You can do a diagnosis of saying this person is not open because of their response, or maybe they're very open to the things of God because of the way they respond. So use that transition in a very smooth way and try to be creative with it. Try to be very sensitive to who they are. And as you share it, what happens is their hearts will be opened up. So you say to this person, "Do you think about spiritual things much?" Are you a praying person? Do you pray a lot? I was talking to a lady on the airplane one time, and she told me, she said about her business and things like that. And then she asked me, well, what do you do, Thomas? And I said, well, I'm a Baptist preacher. And she said, awesome. She said, that's great. And I said, well, really? I said, well, why do you think that's so great? She said, well, I'm a Catholic. And I said, awesome. And then I asked her this. I said, are you a born-again Catholic? And she said, what in the world is that? And so that transition question allowed me, she gave me the opportunity to go right into the gospel, and I took her to John chapter 3 and showed her about where Christ said to Nicodemus, you must be born again. And so be innovative and creative as you share through this acrostic cast. So you've gone through connection, you've made and find out about their activities, you've asked them, are they a spiritual person, which then gives you the opportunity to transition into your story, the T, tell your story. Now, telling your story is such a powerful thing because it allows you to really and truly get to the gospel. Now, when a person says, you know, I'm not very spiritual, you can say, well, you know what, there was a time in my life in which I wasn't a very spiritual person as well. Or maybe they say, yes, somewhat I am. And then you can say to them, well, can I share with you my spiritual journey? That's a great question. I've never had anybody say no to that. Some people do this. They say, well, you can ask them, say, what is your view or opinion on what are the requirements for a person to go into heaven? And now people will give you a variety of answers. And some people might say, well, you have to commit your life to Christ and place your faith in Him. Now, don't believe at that moment that that person has received Christ just because they know the answer. They might have been going to church for weeks or months but have never made that commitment. And so then the obvious question is, well, have you ever made that commitment yourself? Or they might say, you know what, I don't know. Or they could say, you got to go to church, or you got to be good. They can give you a works type of answer. And then that gives you the chance, the transition into this. Well, can I show you what the Bible says are God's requirements for every person to enter into heaven? Many people will say, yes, I'd like to see that. And so this gives us a chance then to tell our story. And the story that we're sharing is the good news of how Christ has transformed our lives. And so this is such a great opportunity for every person to share.